We all think we know the story of Queen Esther, right? She's this amazing Jewish heroine who saved her people from total destruction in ancient Persia. It's a story of incredible courage that's celebrated every year during the Festival of Purim, a total classic.
But what if I told you that story has a shadow, a much darker, way more violent twin, that buried under this tale of heroism is a brutal saga of pure vengeance? Today, we're going to look at the two very, very different versions of the Book of Esther.
See, the story we celebrate today is, well, it's often the cleaned-up version. The original text, the one you'll find in the Hebrew Bible, has this incredibly violent and controversial ending that a lot of people just kind of gloss over.
So let's do a quick recap of the big turning point. You've got this evil advisor, Haman, who has cooked up a genocide. Queen Esther, at great risk to herself, exposes his plot to the king. And just like that, everything flips. The king hangs Haman and issues a new decree, giving the Jewish people the right to arm themselves and fight back. This is where the story of self-defense is supposed to begin. Or does it? Because in the earliest version of this story, what happens next goes way beyond just self-defense. It explodes into a brutal 2-day slaughter.
All right, so let's dive into that original Hebrew text. It's known as the Masoretic text, and it's the standard in the Hebrew Bible. It's a raw story of court politics, ethnic rivalry, and just overwhelming revenge. And honestly, the ending is pretty shocking.
The numbers alone are just staggering. According to the text, the Jewish people killed 75,800 of their enemies across the entire Persian Empire. That number includes 800 people in the capital city of Susa alone.
And the language here does not pull any punches. It is crystal clear. It talks about a scene of incredible bloodshed, saying the Jews struck, slew, and destroyed their enemies. It even says they did as they pleased to those who hated them. Now, it does make a point of saying they didn't take any plunder, but still, wow. But here's the wildest part of this original story. In the middle of all this political scheming and mass violence, there's one character who is totally missing in action. God. There are no prayers, no miracles, no mention of divine intervention at all. It reads less like a sacred text and more like a secular, gritty story of survival and payback. Now, this godless, ultra-violent story was just as unsettling to ancient readers as it is to a lot of us. So much so that a few centuries later, someone came along and created a whole new version. And this is the second book of Esther, the one we find in the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the scriptures.
But this wasn't just a simple translation, okay? It was a total rewrite, a deliberate fix. It was specifically designed to solve the theological and ethical problems of the original, turning a bloody folktale into a pious story about faith.
And how did they do it? Well, they dropped in entirely new sections. All of a sudden, Mordecai has a prophetic dream straight from God, and Esther, right before she goes to see the king, delivers this long, powerful prayer, just pouring her heart out. God is no longer absent. He becomes the main character, the one pulling all the strings.
And these changes go deep. It's not just about adding God here and there. The whole story gets reframed as a religious conflict, not just an ethnic one. Esther's transformed into this devout hero who's acting on God's will. And, get this, in a brilliant political job for the time, this version changes Haman from a Persian to a Macedonian, a clear shot at the Greek rulers who were causing trouble for the Jews when this version was being written.
So, let's put these two endings head to head. When you look at the original Hebrew text versus the Greek rewrite, you realize almost everything changes. The motivation, the theology, even the body count.
Just look at this breakdown. In a Hebrew version, the motivation is pure revenge and retaliation. God is nowhere to be found, and the casualties are massive, over 75,000. It's a raw, ethnic folk tale. But then you look at the Greek version. The motivation becomes divinely ordered self-defense. God is front and center, and the number of casualties drops way down to around 15,000. It becomes a religious morality play.
So what we have are two ancient books telling two profoundly different stories about the very same event. But for all their differences, both versions tap into this incredibly powerful and timeless theme, the story of survival.
The Book of Esther, whichever version you're reading, is a perfect example of what scholars call resistance literature. These are stories written for and by communities who are living under the thumb of powerful, often hostile empires. Think of Joseph in Egypt or Daniel in the Babylonian court.
And these weren't just simple bedtime stories. They were survival guides. They taught people how to navigate these incredibly dangerous political worlds, how to use their wits, and how to hold on to who they were when faced with crushing pressure. And more than anything, they offered hope. Hope that the powerless could, against all odds, survive and even win. Which leaves us with this really fascinating question. What is the true story of Esther? Is it the godless tale of vengeance that we find in the original text? Or is it the story of divine salvation that was retold for generations to come? It really makes you wonder, what matters more? The original words on a page, or the hope that people have been finding in those words for thousands of years?